Today I'll be doing a video on the devil. One of the interesting things about the devil is his learning. He learns very fast. It's to be expected. Thousands of years of being. The thing I don't understand about the learning of the devil is his entering of Judas Iscariot. For a being which learns so fast, which has been around for so many thousands of years, it makes very little sense to me why he would enter into Judas Iscariot. I don't think it would at all be reasonable to believe that when he made the decision to enter into Judas Iscariot, that he was his own self, uninhibited from any external things. Well, I think it's very reasonable to believe that he probably was inhibited by something external to himself, which led to him entering into Judas Iscariot. Because the rate at which he learns so fast, he can connect so many different things, come to so many correct inferences, very good at inferential reasoning. So good that it makes very little sense why he would enter into Judas Iscariot. The thing about the devil is that he can move around the earth so fast, so fast. He can probably watch heaps of parts of the earth all at one given moment. I can remember one time I was thinking about the book of Ephesians, how the devil is the spirit which is at work in those who are disobedient. I can remember thinking that the devil must be in so much trouble with God because he's involved and the evil deeds of creatures, not as a primary agent, but as something else. The spirit which is at work in those who are disobedient. I now believe that I was incorrect in believing that the devil would be in a lot of trouble with God. He's not the primary agent behind the evil deeds of creatures. He can only act within the will of a creature. He could never God would never permit him to do something outside of the will of a creature. So, some creatures are probably in a lot more trouble with God than the devil. And the interesting thing about the devil is how the members of the angelic host were created before the world began. I believe that the rebellion probably occurred before the world was created. The implications of that, interesting. When the devil rebelled, he had no idea that there would be a world and humanity. He would have been ignorant of that, and he wouldn't have known that the implications of the rebellion would be that he would be a spirit at work on the earth, sort of assisting others in the evil deeds which they would be willing to do. And that is why it makes sense that the devil all the evil deeds on the earth, that it kind of makes it a bit unreasonable to believe that he would be in a lot of trouble with God compared to some other humans. Because, like, some people, some of the things, wouldn't even occur if God never created the world. It's like the devil rebels, the world hasn't been created, and then the world comes into being, and the implications of that are that he's involved, to some extent, in the evil deeds of creatures on the earth. To varying degrees, of course. Judas Iscariot was a very unique instance. I think when the devil rebelled, I think he understood that something would come from that. I think that the rebellion was intellectual. I think that the devil had the perfect understanding that the rebellion wouldn't lead to a victory, a real victory against God. And I think he understood that the rebellion was something intellectual. So intellectual that he might have thought it to be a victory in some sense. But the created cannot defeat the uncreated. So it couldn't be considered a proper victory. It's more like the devil gets a sense that there's an intellectual victory or something. Of course, that view might not hold water that well to scripture. The devil, well, Lucifer at that time, he thought that he would elevate his throne above the stars of God. That could be thought of as having an intellectual component to it. I don't think the devil, well, Lucifer, I don't think he was entirely convinced that he would indeed elevate his throne above the stars of God. I think that perhaps there was something intellectual to it. It makes most sense to me that the rebellion of the 1/3 of the members of the angelic host, that it would have an intellectual nature. The interesting thing is that Lucifer had been bestowed with qualities which led to pride. God bestowed those qualities upon Lucifer. It's almost as if perhaps God, perhaps he had some higher purpose behind that bestowal. I don't see God capriciously decided to bestow Lucifer with a quality which would lead to pride. I think he had a reason. I don't know what the reason is. It adds complexity to the rebellion, though. It adds complexity to God. One of the interesting things about the devil is the pleasure he has in unrighteousness. I think that's probably got an intellectual element to it as well. I don't think that the pleasure in unrighteousness comes from an extreme hatred for humans. I think that there's probably an intellectual component to it. He hates God, and he takes pleasure in doing things which God really hates, because he knows that God is the ultimate being. He might be like, I'm a creature. I could be considered in some respect assisting an X. And then he probably thinks, God is so amazing, so great, that it's to the extent that there's an intellectual component to the pleasure and unrighteousness. He knows how much God hates sin. God hates sin so much. It makes sense. I think his set-apartness necessitates that he really hates sin. God is perfectly aware that if no creature was ever created, there would have never been any sin whatsoever. The devil's activities in the world, I don't think that he's in as nearly as much trouble with God as some other creatures. Some people would probably be like, "No, that's not right." In reality, it makes sense to me. Some might say, the devil was an angelic being. He came before the humans. He's probably greater in wisdom and knowledge. He's probably got more moral agency for the things which occur on Earth. Some people probably like that. It sort of makes some sense, but really, I think that if people gave it more thought, people would realise that there are some creatures which are in more trouble with God than the devil. Some might consider that very, well, the subtlety of the devil in the world. If the devil didn't have the subtlety in the world which he does, things would be different. But with the amount of subtlety of the devil in the world, he's not in as much trouble with God as other creatures. interesting thing about him entering into Judas Iscariot is there are scriptures about God before determining the death of Jesus. Judas Iscariot, the son of perdition. The scripture had to be fulfilled. In that one instance where the devil enters into Judas Iscariot, that goes beyond Ephesians 2:2. The spirit which is now at work in those who are disobedient. It goes beyond that. And in that one instance, the amount of moral culpability. Judas Iscariot, prior to doing what he did when the devil entered into him, he had already grown accustomed to stealing from the treasury. So it was well and truly within the will of Judas Iscariot to do what he did. The amount of the devil's influence in Judas Iscariot probably wouldn't even have been that significant, but it would have been more than in the average instance of Ephesians 2:2. The spirit which is now at work in those who are disobedient. And I can't see the devil getting as much moral blame as Judas Iscariot. It's almost as if the devil was like a pawn. Almost as if he went into a very peculiar state of being where philosophical thought decreased, and he just went ahead and did something, enter into Judas Iscariot. For the devil, the creation of the world and humanity, it could be thought of as being like an added benefit to the rebellion in heaven. I think that there would have been an intellectual rebellion in heaven. And I think that what occurs on the earth, I think that that's like an extension to the intellectual rebellion which occurred in heaven. The devil's probably glad that there was the extension. The devil hates God so much. And one of the interesting things about the devil is his conscience. With humans, there are dopamine receptors. The dopamine receptor, at a kind of early stage of development, it's very easy to activate to a notable extent. But as time goes on, the dopamine receptor becomes harder to activate to a high extent if whatever stimuli it is which is causing the dopamine receptor to go up to a high extent, if it's the same stimuli, it won't be sufficient for the dopamine receptor to go up to the same extent. The same stimuli over and over will basically mean that something more is required to get the dopamine receptor up to a higher extent. I think there is a similarity between members of the angelic host and humans. The similarity is that the same stimuli over and over, at first, the stimuli, whatever stimuli it is, would be sufficient, if it's enough, to get the dopamine receptor to go up to a high extent, but the same stimuli over and over, it doesn't go up to the same high extent. The extent to which the dopamine receptor goes up decreases the more the thing is exposed to the same stimuli. So, if the dopamine receptor is to go up to a high extent, then more substantial stimuli is required. And I think that the devil has something similar to humans. When he sees something evil on planet Earth, day one of the first disobedience. That's like the very beginning. That's like he gets his pleasure up to that high extent. He's like, whoa, Adam and Eve have rebelled. He gets an intellectual high off of that. But as time goes on, it takes more and more for the devil to get pleasure. The devil, his conscience and his pleasure in unrighteousness, it's probably to the extent that if God created another Eden on the earth, had a tree, had two people, which were both sinless, and they rebelled, it probably wouldn't be that substantial in the his pleasure in unrighteousness. It probably won't be very substantial. It'll probably be like, eh. So, when the devil gets excited, it takes something substantial. It takes something substantial, especially during this period of the Earth's existence. The devil's seeing so much evil that it takes something substantial to arouse his passions. One of the things about the devil is the rarity of manifestations of him on the earth in the spirit form. The rarity of a physical manifestation as a humanoid, well, I think that the rarity would have been, I'm not sure, but the temp during the New Testament, that was the devil. Fits back in with the devil being described as the serpent and the tempting of Eve. I think that the rarity of a physical manifestation of the devil on the earth, I think that that's probably pretty rare. I think it's probably true that it's equally rare for manifestation of him on the earth in a spirit form, if not rarer. I think if the devil was to have a manifestation on the earth as a spirit being, I think that the rarity is such as that perhaps God willed for it, because spiritual manifestation of him on the earth, oh, something has to, for that to happen. Something, well, and the thing, whatever it is, it's to the point that God probably sees it fit that there would be a spiritual manifestation of him on the earth. A spiritual manifestation of the devil on the earth. If something certain were to occur. If God did sort of kind of will for the devil to have a manifestation of himself on the earth in the spirit form, it would probably be to get someone to realise something. I seem to recall Aleister Crowley. I seem to recall the spirit being evoked. I think, from what I recall, Aleister Crowley stayed at a location a very long time. All sorts of things were going on. All sorts of sorcery. And probably sorcery of the worst sort. And from what I recall, after that duration, and all the sorcery, only after that was there a visible manifestation of an evil spirit being. So that would probably lend credence to the notion that if the devil was to have a manifestation on the earth as a spirit being, something very substantial would have to occur. One of the interesting things about the punishment of the devil is that I can vaguely recall certain scripture from what I recall. There were some members of the angelic host in the human form, humanoids, they were sitting down and they saw some people walking along. And they were like, they were probably blushing. The humanoids, which are the members of the angelic host, they were probably blushing. From one article, they were blushing or something of the sort because they intuitively knew that their iniquity wasn't of the same extent. And then the humans which they saw walking along. I can remember one time I was thinking about how the devil understands that God's holy wrath is just. That's interesting. I think it goes back to the rebellion. How the rebellion probably had an intellectual dynamic to it. I can remember thinking an analogy for the devil and his angels. The analogy was high school students. High school students staying out, playing basketball, 45 minutes, when they're supposed to be in class doing their work. The teacher, which in the analogy is God, goes out. The basketball players, they're like, yeah, we intuitively know we've done wrong. We deserve wrath.
Students ready.
Of course, in the context of a teacher, it would probably be like words of rebuke. In the context of God and the devil and his angels, it would be like bad. The holy angels, they're probably like, they've probably done lots of work. They're probably in the class, working away. While in the analogy, the devil and his angels, they're basically like, yeah, they're having some fun or something, and taking pleasure in being disobedient. In this analogy, the devil and the angels, it's like that's as disobedient as they get. After that, it's like, it's interesting. I can remember thinking about dopamine receptors. Dopamine receptors are interesting. If I had to guess, in the analogy, it's like the dopamine receptor of the basketball players, it's gone to the very height. In the context of the devil as a spirit being, it's like if he were to see little 5-year-old Joey with wet pants, it would be like he would probably take on the role of Mother Hen. He'd probably think himself to be a Mother Hen or something. He'd probably put a little hood on and think of himself as being like